Somewhere, right now, a message is being ignored. Not a message from a stranger, not a message from a preacher on a stage. 2. A message from heaven itself, given through the Mother of God, and most Christians today are walking past it like it means nothing. She has appeared before, at Fatima, at Lourdes, at Guadalupe, at La Salette. Each time she came with tear, each time she came with warnings. And each time the world listened for a season and then went back to sleep. But there is something deeper hidden inside these apparitions. Something most sermons never touch. Something the faithful whisper about in quiet rooms, but almost no one says out loud from the pulpit. 5 warnings. 5 warnings the Blessed Virgin Mary has given. Across centuries, across continents, across cultures that point to the same coming reality. A reality the modern church has grown too comfortable to preach. A reality the modern Christian has grown too distracted to hear. Tonight, we are going to open what has been sealed. We are going to walk through what she said and what she meant, not the sanitized version. 2, not the version safe enough for a greeting card. The real warnings, the ones that should make you tremble a little, the ones that should make you get on your knees tonight, not tomorrow. 2, because Scripture tells us, he who has ears, let him hear. And heaven does not repeat itself forever. If you have ever felt that something is coming, if you've ever sensed that the world is quietly sliding somewhere, it cannot return from, you are not imagining it. Stay with me. Because warning number 3, that's the one almost no one is prepared for. 2, before we continue, subscribe to Ripperger Insights and turn on notifications, because these powerful messages are meant for those who seek truth and deeper understanding. 2, the woman clothed in sorrow there is a verse in the book of Revelation that the early church fathers read with trembling. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, 2, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Revelation 12:1. That woman has never stopped appearing, not merely as a symbol. 2, not merely as a theological idea confined to stained glass and old paintings. She has stepped again and again into human history, into fields, into grottos, into the hands of frightened children who had no reason to lie and no way to invent what they saw. Why children? Why the poor? Why the overlooked corners of the world? A hillside in Portugal, a cave in France, a hill in Mexico. Because heaven does not knock on the doors that expect it. Heaven comes to the humble, the ones the world has forgotten, because they are the ones still capable of listening. What did she say when she came? She wept at La Salette in 1846. 2 shepherd children, Melanie and Maximin, encountered a woman seated on a rock, weeping so hard that her tears seemed to burn where they fell. She did not come with comfort alone. She came with grief, a mother's grief. 2, the grief of someone watching her children walk toward a cliff and knowing most of them will not turn back in time. Ask yourself, when was the last time you saw a mother weep like that over you? 2, this is the first thing most modern Christians have forgotten. Apparitions are not decorations. They are not comforting bedtime stories to make us feel spiritually secure. They are alarms. 2, and an alarm ignored long enough stops sounding like an alarm. It starts sounding like background noise. That is precisely what has happened. The warnings of Fatima, La Salette, and Akita have become background noise, quoted in passing, reduced to devotional trivia. Meanwhile, the actual content of what was said, the substance of the warnings, sits untouched. 2, because it is uncomfortable, because it demands something of us. Let's go back to the beginning. 1917, Portugal. 3 shepherd children, Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta, encounter a lady more brilliant than the sun. She asks them to pray the rosary daily. She asks for sacrifice. She asks for reparation for sin. 2, and then she shows them something so severe that church officials debated for decades whether the world was ready to hear it. A vision of hell. Not a metaphorical hell, not a psychological hell, Lucia describes souls like transparent burning embers, a sea of fire, demonic shapes, screams of despair, rising and falling like waves crashing on rock. 2. She said the vision was so terrifying that had the lady not promised to bring them to heaven, she believed they would have died of fright on the spot. Why show 3 children something like that? 2. Because the modern world has anesthetized itself against the reality of judgment. We have built comfortable theology, comfortable churches, comfortable sermons that speak endlessly of mercy, but almost never of what mercy is rescuing us from. And heaven, it seems, decided that comfort was no longer serving the truth. This is warning number 1, and it is the foundation for everything that follows. Hell is real. Souls are falling into it, even now, and most of Christianity has stopped preaching about it. 2, not because theologians doubt it exists. Ask any serious Catholic theologian, and they will affirm the Church's teaching without hesitation. 2, but affirming a doctrine in a catechism and preaching it with the urgency it deserves from the pulpit are 2 very different things. And when the second stops happening, people stop believing the first matters. Think about your own life for a moment. When was the last time you heard a homily on the 4 last things? Death, judgment, heaven, hell? When was the last time anyone urged you with real urgency? Consider the state of your soul before God. Silence. That's usually the answer. And silence is exactly what the enemy of our souls wants. There's an old saying among those who study these apparitions carefully. The greatest deception of this age isn't that people stop believing in God. It's that people stop believing evil is real, too, and stopped believing that their choices carry eternal weight. Mary's first warning cuts directly against that deception. She didn't come to give warm feelings. She came to shake shepherd children, and through them, shake the whole world awake, and this is only the beginning. Because if warning 1 is about the reality most people refuse to face, 2. Warning 2 is about the specific mechanism by which that refusal spreads, generation after generation, quietly, almost invisibly, until an entire society forgets what it once knew. We're going deeper. 2. And I promise you, what comes next will make you look at your own daily habits differently. The slow erasure if hell is the destination most have stopped fearing. 2. Then the second warning concerns the road that leads there. A road so gradual, so gentle in its descent, that almost no one notices they are walking it. At Fatima, the lady asked for something specific and repeated, "Pray the rosary every day, not once a week, not on special occasions. Every day." Why would heaven place such heavy emphasis on something that, to modern ears, sounds almost quaint? Beads, repeated prayers, a devotion many now consider optional at best, because the rosary is not decoration, it is a weapon. And more importantly, 2, it is a discipline, a daily act of turning the mind back toward eternal things in a world engineered to pull it away. Here is the warning most Christians ignore. The loss of daily prayer is not a small inconvenience. It is the primary mechanism by which souls drift from grace without ever making a dramatic, conscious decision to reject God. Nobody wakes up one morning and declares, "Today, I abandon my faith." That almost never happens. What happens instead is far quieter and far more dangerous. A person skips prayer one day because they're tired, then again because they're busy. Then the habit fades entirely, replaced by scrolling, noise, distraction. Weeks pass, months. And one day, they realize they can't remember the last time they truly spoke to God. And worse, they don't feel the absence as loss. They feel it as normal. This is precisely what the lady saw coming in 1917. In an age before television, before smartphones, before an entire economy built on capturing human attention every waking second. If daily prayer was urgent then, how much more urgent is it now? 2, when the forces competing for our attention are more sophisticated, more relentless, and more spiritually corrosive than anything the shepherd children could have imagined. Consider Jacinta Marto, the youngest of the three visionaries. After witnessing the vision of hell, her entire personality changed. She, who had once been a normal, playful child, began spending hours in prayer, offering sacrifices, weeping for sinners she had never met. She died at the age of 9, having spent her final months in painful illness, offering every moment of suffering for the conversion of souls she would never see in this life. Ask yourself, honestly, could you do that? Could you offer discomfort, inconvenience, even suffering? Sit for someone you'll never meet because you believed their eternal soul was at stake. Most of us can't even offer 15 minutes of silence without reaching for a phone. This is the second warning laid bare. Modern life has been engineered, whether by human design or by something more calculating behind it, to make silence unbearable and prayer inconvenient. And a Christianity without daily, disciplined prayer is a Christianity that will not survive contact with the pressures of this age. There's a reason the saints, throughout history, in every century, in every culture, all arrived at the same conclusion independently. Without serious prayer, the spiritual life collapses. Not eventually, not maybe, inevitably. Saint Teresa of Avila said that the soul without prayer is like a body without a soul, alive in name only. Saint John Vianney, the curé of Ars, spent hours in the confessional specifically because he saw, parish after parish, what happens when prayer is abandoned, not sudden dramatic apostasy, but slow, comfortable indifference. Indifference, that is the real enemy behind the second warning. Krot, not violent persecution, though that exists too, but something quieter and in some ways more effective. A gradual numbing of the soul until the things of God simply stop feeling important. 2, look at the world around you right now. Churches with fewer people in the pews than a generation ago. Households where the rosary, once a nightly family practice, is now unknown to the children being raised in them. An entire generation growing up biblically illiterate, unable to name the 10 Commandments, unaware of the lives of the saints who once inspired entire civilizations. This didn't happen through a single dramatic event. It happened one skipped prayer at a time, one missed mass at a time. 2, one generation slightly less formed than the one before it, passing that slight deficit onto the next, compounding quietly like interest on a debt nobody remembers taking out. The lady's warning at Fatima was not abstract theology. It was a mother's plea, aimed directly at preventing exactly this outcome. Pray the rosary every day, she said, not as ritual for its own sake, but as spiritual armor for an age she could already see coming. An age of noise, an age of distraction, an age where the greatest threat to faith would not be persecution from without, but erosion from within. 2, if this message is touching your heart, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Referger Insights, and share this message with someone who needs to hear it. Now we move to the third warning, and this is the one that touches the deepest nerve because it concerns not distant nations or future generations, but the state of the family right now in your own home. Warning about the home every apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary across every century circles back eventually to the same fragile, sacred institution, the family at Fatima. The message was clear that the state of the world hinges on the state of souls, and the state of souls is shaped first, before school, before church, before any outside influence, in the home. At Akita, Japan, in 1973, a message given to Sister Agnes Sasagawa spoke of division, of discord, of a church so fractured internally that clergy would turn against clergy. 2, and the faithful would grow confused about what to even believe. Think about that. In the home, in marriages under strain, in parents too exhausted, too distracted, or too uncatechized themselves to hand on the faith to their children. Here is the third warning, and it is perhaps the most personally uncomfortable one. The family, not the culture at large. 2, is the primary battlefield, and most Christian households have already surrendered significant ground without realizing it. Consider what a Christian home once looked like. Morning prayers, grace before meals, 2 said without embarrassment. The rosary prayed together in the evening. Saints' feast days celebrated with more warmth than secular holidays borrowed from the culture around them. Scripture read aloud, not as an academic exercise, but as living food for the soul. Now, consider the average household today, Christian in name, perhaps still attending Mass on Sundays, but largely indistinguishable in daily rhythm from any secular family on the block. Meals eaten in silence, each family member absorbed in a separate screen. 2. Children who can name dozens of characters from entertainment franchises, but cannot name the 12 apostles. Parents who would be mortified to have their child use foul language, yet think nothing of that same child going days without opening Scripture. This is not condemnation for its own sake. This is the warning made visible in ordinary life. 2. Heaven is not shocked by dramatic sins committed in dark corners nearly as much as it grieves over ordinary faith quietly abandoned in well-lit living rooms. At La Salette, the lady wept specifically over the desecration of the Lord's Day, over families who no longer kept Sunday holy, who filled it instead with labor and leisure indistinguishable from any other day of the week. 2. She warned that this abandonment of sacred time would have consequences, not as arbitrary punishment, but as natural spiritual consequence, the way a plant deprived of water eventually withers. 2. Not because the gardener is cruel, but because that is simply what happens when a needed thing is withheld. Sunday was never meant to be merely a pause from work. 2. It was meant to be a weekly reorientation of the entire household toward eternity, a standing reminder, built into the very rhythm of the week, that this world is not all there is. Remove that reminder, 2, and a family's spiritual compass begins, slowly, to lose its true north. And here is what should alarm every parent listening. Children do not absorb faith primarily from sermons they half hear on Sunday morning. 2. They absorb it from what they watch their parents do day after day in the unremarkable hours of ordinary life. 2. A child who watches a parent pray with real devotion learns that prayer matters more than any lecture could teach them. 2. A child who watches a parent treat faith as an afterthought, squeezed in only when convenient, learns that lesson just as thoroughly without a single word being spoken. 2. This is why the third warning cuts so close to home. Literally, it is not about distant cultural forces beyond our control. It is about the small daily choices within every household, choices about prayer, about how Sunday is spent, about what is modeled for the next generation, that either build a fortress of faith or quietly demolish one ordinary day at a time. Ask yourself honestly, if your children, or the children in your life, grow up to have exactly the level of faith they saw modeled in your home, no more devout, no more disciplined, no more sacrificial than what they witnessed from you, would that be enough to carry them through the trials this age will bring them? For many, if they are honest, the answer brings real discomfort. 2. And that discomfort is not meant to shame you. It is meant to move you, because heaven's warnings are never given to make us despair. They are given while there is still time to change course. 2. Which brings us to the fourth warning, and this one concerns something even Fatima's own visionaries struggled for years to fully understand. 2. The warning of deception from within there is a particular kind of danger that Scripture treats with more severity than almost any other. Not persecution from outsiders, but deception arising from within the community of believers itself. Christ himself warned of this directly. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Matthew 24:24. Notice the phrasing, not if possible, even the pagans, or even the indifferent, even the elect, even those who consider themselves devout. 2. Faithful, secure in their belief. This is the fourth warning embedded across multiple apparitions, and it is the one modern believers are least prepared to hear. 2. Because it does not point outward at an obvious enemy. It points inward at confusion arising from sources that appear on the surface entirely legitimate. At Akita, the message given was unusually direct for a Marian apparition. A warning that division would spread even among clergy and religious, that the faithful would find themselves confused about doctrine, because voices claiming authority would offer teaching in conflict with what the church has always held. 2. Not obvious heresy easily dismissed, but subtle drift, dressed in familiar language, spreading through institutions that people trust precisely because they are institutions. Why would heaven warn about this so specifically? Because deception that comes from an obvious enemy is relatively easy to resist. We instinctively guard against threats we can clearly identify. Deception that comes wearing a friendly face, speaking familiar religious vocabulary, operating from within trusted structures, that is far harder to detect and therefore far more dangerous. 2. Think of how the greatest spiritual battles in Scripture were rarely won or lost through obvious external confrontation alone. The serpent in the garden did not appear as an obvious monster. 2. He appeared reasonable, even helpful, offering an interpretation of God's command that sounded almost more generous than the original. Did God actually say, Genesis 3:1, that single question, subtle, 2, seemingly innocent, was the opening through which humanity's fall began? This same pattern repeats throughout salvationist history and continues today. The danger was never primarily armies at the gate. 2. The danger was always the quiet reinterpretation from within, a gradual softening of teaching, a gradual redefinition of sin, a gradual erosion of the fear of the Lord. 2. Replaced instead by a comfortable spirituality that asks little and promises everything. Here is an uncomfortable question worth sitting with. How would you personally recognize subtle doctrinal drift if you encountered it? If someone in a position of trust, a respected voice, a familiar platform, 2, even a member of the clergy, began teaching something that sounded compassionate, sounded reasonable, sounded almost more loving than traditional teaching, would you have the spiritual and doctrinal grounding necessary to recognize the danger? For many Christians today, honestly, the answer is no. Not because they lack sincerity, but because they lack formation. Decades of thin catechesis, watered-down homilies, and religious education reduced to vague sentimentality have left entire generations without the doctrinal foundation necessary to detect when something has quietly shifted away from what the church has always taught. 2. This is precisely the vulnerability the fourth warning addresses. It is not primarily a warning about a single dramatic false prophet appearing on a stage somewhere. 2. It is a warning about an entire culture of belief gradually softened from within, until it can no longer distinguish authentic teaching from comfortable imitation. The remedy, historically, has always been the same, repeated across centuries by every saint who faced similar confusion in their own era. Return to the sources. Return to Scripture, read seriously and often, not skimmed occasionally. 2. Return to the catechism, studied rather than assumed. Return to the lives and writings of the saints, whose holiness was tested and proven across time. 2. Rather than untested voices, simply because they are current and popular. Discernment is not a passive gift that arrives automatically through good intentions. It is cultivated deliberately through formation, through prayer, through humility, willing to be corrected by something older and larger than one's own personal preference. Without that formation, even sincere believers become vulnerable to exactly the deception Christ warned would target even the elect. 2. And this leads directly into the fifth and final warning, the one that ties every previous warning together, and the one that concerns not what is coming from outside us, but what is required of us, too, individually, before it arrives. If this message is touching your heart, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Ripperger Insights, and share this message with someone who needs to hear it. 2. The warning of the hour there is a phrase used again and again throughout these apparitions, one that should stop every listener in their tracks. Time is running short. 2. Not in the sense of a fixed date that can be calculated on a calendar. History is full of failed predictions from those who claim to know exactly when the end would come. And Christ himself was explicit that of that day and hour no one knows. Matthew 24:36. But in a different, more personal sense, the warning is not primarily about